Take cover!
I was alone in the radio tent when it first happened. The desert wind rattled the canvas like fingernails on glass, and I could hear it through the thin walls, whispering, tugging at the loose flaps. Nights out here are different. You feel the emptiness pressing against your bones, like the land itself is watching, waiting for something to snap. I had been on recon for hours, circling a perimeter that didn't make sense even to the maps. They told us the place was abandoned, no enemies, nothing. But out here, nothing has a way of breathing, of whispering. The radio crackled, faint at first, just the static hum of the equipment. I was tired, every muscle screaming, and I was nursing a bottle of water I'd long since warmed to sand temperature. And then, out of the static, a voice, clear, male. It said something I couldn't quite make out. I froze. My hands were on the knobs, fingers trembling, heart hammering like a drum in a parade I didn't want to join. I leaned closer. The voice came again. This time, I swear, it said my name. My full name. Not a nickname, not a call sign. My name. My head spun. The radios weren't supposed to pick up civilian chatter out here. Not with the frequencies we were on. Not words like that. And I had been alone in this sector for hours. I laughed at first. Nerve laugh. Tried to tell myself it was a hallucination. The desert heat playing tricks. But when I hit the switch to call base, the voice returned, not through the headphones, but through the tiny speaker in the tent. Clearer now, like someone was standing right behind me, whispering my name. I spun around. The tent was empty. The canvas flapped violently. The night wind howled. I could smell the metal of my rifle in my own hands. Taste the grit of sand in my mouth. I wanted to run, but my boots were stuck in the sand, as if the desert had decided to claim me. And then there was a laugh. Not a soldier's laugh, not human. Something clipped, broken, like it had no lungs but wanted to scream anyway. It came from the radio. It echoed from inside my skull. I dropped my water bottle. It hit the floor with a dull thud, sand spilling across the ground, and the laughter stopped. Silence. Heavy, thick, like it had weight. I turned the knobs, switched channels. Same voice, saying the same words. Sometimes my name. Sometimes phrases I didn't understand. Words I didn't know existed. My throat went dry. I tried to speak, to call for anyone, my team, base, but the static swallowed every sound. Then I noticed the sand around the tent. Footprints. Not mine. Not the team's. Small. Bare. They circled the tent, sometimes stopping just a few feet away, then vanishing. My mind raced. I had been alone. I knew it. If you were me, would you have opened the flap? I didn't. I couldn't. Not yet. The radio started clicking, softly at first, then rapidly, like someone was pounding invisible keys. The voice returned, now calling out coordinates. Coordinates I recognized. My patrol path, exactly where I was standing. That's when my stomach turned over. Someone, or something, was tracking me, and it wasn't human. I remember touching the sand, trying to ground myself. It felt wrong, cold in patches, like the night hadn't just settled over the desert. It had sunk into it. Shadows didn't match the moonlight. They twisted, reached, moved. I rubbed my eyes, pinched myself. Nothing helped. By the time I forced myself to sit, my back against the wall of the tent, I could hear breathing. Not the wind, not my own. Heavy, shallow, and somehow too close. Every instinct screamed to flee, to leave the radio, leave the sand, leave the desert itself. But I couldn't. I couldn't stop listening, because then it whispered something new, something I can't unhear. You shouldn't be here, it said, clear, calm, like a confession, like a warning. My hand shook as I reached for the radio, and it wasn't static anymore. It was voices, layered, overlapping, dozens of them. Soldiers, maybe, maybe not. I could hear orders, shouts, screams, names, dates, places I'd never been. And buried beneath it all, a softer, persistent murmur. We see you. I've tried to convince myself it was a trick of isolation, heat, or exhaustion. But you feel it too when a place is awake. And this place, it was awake, and it was angry, or hungry, or both. I spent the night like that, barely moving, barely breathing, listening. When dawn came, I thought it would stop. But the radio, it didn't. It waited for me to rise, to step out. And I did. That's when I saw the first shadow that wasn't mine. I should have run. I should have thrown my rifle down and sprinted toward the sun, toward anything that promised life. But curiosity is a curse in the desert. I stepped out of the tent, boots sinking slightly in sand that was warm under the early light, and froze. There was nothing, just dunes stretching like waves frozen in time. But the shadows, my shadow, the canvas flaps, weren't behaving. One flickered behind me, long and thin, then recoiled, like it was avoiding something it didn't want to see. The radio in my pack crackled. I froze again. I hadn't touched it. Not yet. And yet it whispered. Names. Orders. Places I didn't recognize, but each word was punctuated by a sound I knew too well. The metallic clink of boots on hard surfaces. Someone, or something moving in rhythm, counting. I shook. My teeth rattled. The desert was supposed to be empty. I was alone. I was alone. The voice changed then, softer, patient, almost intimate. Why are you here? It asked. Not my name this time, but me, my choices, my hesitation. I glanced at the horizon, expecting to see someone running toward me. But there was nothing. Only the wind, and the sand, and something beneath it, waiting. I followed the footprints again. Tiny, too precise to be random. They led to a depression in the dunes, a pit that hadn't been there the day before. I leaned over the edge. The radio screeched. I stumbled back, sand spraying across my boots. And then I saw them. Faces. Just glimpses. Pale, half-formed, pressed into the walls of the pit. Their eyes, hollow and black, watched me. I felt them studying me, evaluating me. I wanted to look away. I wanted to close the radio. I couldn't. Something moved behind me. Quick, sharp. My heart slammed against my ribs. I spun. Nothing. But the air smelled wrong. Rotten, metallic, like iron spilled on old stone. And the voices grew louder, layered now. Screams, whispers, orders, laughter. I dropped to my knees, hands over my ears. But I could still hear them. Always hear them. Then I heard my own voice screaming a warning I didn't remember giving. Get out, I shouted. But it wasn't me. It was deeper, distorted, echoing from the radio. Each word reverberated through the sand, through the dunes, through my chest. My knees buckled, my stomach turned, and in that moment, I realized I hadn't been alone, ever. The desert itself seemed to pulse. Shadows stretched unnaturally. The pit, I couldn't take my eyes off it, started to shift. Faces emerged, not fully, but enough. Enough to make me scream. And then a hand, just one, skeletal, reaching upward. I wanted to run, but the sand swallowed my boots like the earth had grown teeth. I fell forward, hands scraping against the gritty surface. My palms stung, blood mixing with the red sand. The radio flared to life again. This time it wasn't words, it was sound. Hundreds of voices layered, overlapping, and through the chaos, I thought I could hear someone crying, someone I knew but couldn't place. And then the whisper, "You hear us. You're ours." My stomach turned. I vomited. Sand mixed with bile and metal. I wanted to close my eyes. I wanted to sleep. But the desert had other plans. I stumbled back to the tent, dragging my pack behind me. The canvas flaps banged in the wind, shadows twisting across the walls like living things. I slammed the flap shut, pressed my back against it, and listened. The radio crackled. A new voice. Deeper, slower, closer. It wasn't asking this time. It was commanding. "Follow us," it said. I shouldn't have. I shouldn't have obeyed. But the pull, the magnetic weight in my chest, I couldn't resist. Every instinct screamed to run. But something in the tone of that voice, in the static, in the whispers beneath it, told me that stepping forward wasn't optional. It was inevitable. I grabbed my rifle. My hands shook. I could hear the voices again, but now they were different, calling names I didn't recognize, places I couldn't imagine. They spoke of things I didn't want to know, and each time I tried to tune out, the voices grew louder, sharper, slicing through my thoughts like knives. Then I saw movement in the distance. Dunes shifting. Not wind. Something walking. Not like a soldier. Not like me. But upright. Careful. Deliberate. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The radio whispered again. "You'll understand soon." I don't know why I obeyed. I shouldn't have. I should have stayed in the tent, waited for daylight, waited for rescue. But curiosity, horrible, relentless curiosity, pulled me forward. I followed the footprints deeper into the dunes, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward me, almost guiding me. By the time I realized the ground beneath me was different, softer, almost alive, it was too late. I was surrounded, not by people, not entirely, but by something watching, waiting, whispering. And the radio? God, the radio suddenly switched channels on its own, every single one, and every channel spoke the same thing. "We see you. You cannot leave." I dropped to my knees. Sand and grit burned my hands. My rifle hit the ground. I couldn't scream. Not anymore. Not even for myself. And then the whispers grew louder, the shadows closer, and something cold, impossibly cold, touched my shoulder. I turned. Nothing. But I felt it. Heavy. Pressing. The desert breathed around me. And I realized, as the radio started laughing, that whatever this was, it was patient, and it had been waiting. I don't remember how long I stayed there, on my knees in the sand, clutching the rifle I couldn't even lift. Time didn't exist. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe seconds. The sun climbed, blurred by heat, and the radio? It didn't stop. It whispered, screamed, laughed. Sometimes it was my voice, sometimes something else's, something older, something that knew my fears before I did. I forced myself to stand. Every muscle in my body protested. My boots sank into sand that wasn't sand. Soft, wet, breathing. I swear it moved beneath me. Shadows danced across the dunes in impossible ways. Long shadows that split in two, then three, reaching toward me like they wanted to swallow me whole. And every time I tried to step forward, the sand pulled me back, as if the earth itself was a leash tied around my ankles. I wanted to flee. God, I wanted to run, but my feet moved in loops. The footprints, always ahead, circling, never ending, called me. And I had to follow them. Something compelled me. I didn't understand why, but I knew that if I stopped, I would vanish into the sand, into the voices, into whatever was watching. The first real encounter, I'll never forget. I turned a dune, high, and saw it, half hidden behind the ridge. I froze. It was human, almost, but wrong. Too tall, limbs bent at impossible angles, eyes black holes that reflected nothing, and yet somehow they saw everything. I wanted to raise my rifle. I couldn't. My fingers trembled, my voice stuck in my throat. And then it moved, slow, deliberate, and the sand beneath it didn't shift. It just glided, silent toward me. The radio screamed. Not static this time, not words, but a sound that made my teeth ache. High-pitched, low-pitched, all at once. And then words. My mother's voice, my father's, someone I thought long dead, calling me, pleading with me. And the thing in the sand paused, tilted its head. It mimicked them perfectly. I screamed, I ran, or thought I did. My boots barely gripped the sand. The desert twisted around me. Dunes became cliffs, cliffs became hollows. Shadows swirled. The radio kept up with me, broadcasting every scream, every desperate gasp. And then, from behind, the thing spoke. Not a voice, a thought, a command. Come back. I stopped, my chest heaving, my hands shaking. And that's when I noticed the other footprints, smaller, human-sized, surrounding me now, coming from every direction. They weren't soldiers, not exactly. Faces pressed into the sand, screaming silently, hollow eyes, mouths moving. And the radio? God, the radio was feeding them. Every static burst, every whisper, every laugh. It was like they were alive, using it to call me, lure me. I wanted to smash it, throw it into the dunes and break it. But my fingers moved as if under their own command. I raised it, hands trembling, and suddenly the voices changed. They were calm now, too calm. I could hear my own heartbeat in them, my own thoughts. And then the whisper, "You can't leave. You're part of this now." I stumbled, fell. Sand filled my mouth. My eyes burned. And the thing, no, things surrounded me. Not all at once. They came in waves. Shadows, faces, limbs bending the wrong way. Voices layering, overlapping, speaking languages I didn't know and yet understood. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. couldn't move. And then, silence. Abrupt, total. My chest heaved. The sun beat down. The desert returned to nothingness. But I knew better. I knew the calm was temporary. Temporary, like the eye of a storm. I pressed my hands to the sand, felt movement, subtle. Beneath the grains, beneath the dunes, they were moving, watching, waiting. And the radio, once silent, sparked back to life. One voice, calm, clear. Look at me. I raised my eyes. The first thing I saw was a face emerging from the sand. Not fully formed, not yet. Just a pale mask. And it smiled. Too wide. Teeth too sharp. And the voice, familiar, distorted. It wasn't the radio anymore. It was inside my skull, whispering every word, every command, every memory I didn't want to remember. I ran again, or thought I did, but the desert had changed. Paths I had memorized twisted beneath me. Dunes became walls. Shadows became hands. Sand became teeth. And the radio? It screamed my failures, my fears, my shame. Each step forward only dragged me further into whatever this place was. Then it spoke again. Not my name this time. Something else. Something I shouldn't know. Do you remember the others? I remembered, or thought I did. A flash. Snippets. Faces. Screams. Betrayals. Warnings I'd ignored. Names of soldiers gone missing. Voices lost in the static. And the realization hit me. This wasn't a hallucination. Not heat. Not exhaustion. Not isolation. It was all of them. All the men who had vanished here. And now it was my turn. I screamed. The radio screamed back. Shadows reached. Sand shifted. And in the middle of it all, I saw the pit again, only bigger, filled with faces, hundreds of them, staring, waiting. And something in me gave in. I don't know how long I stood there, trembling, paralyzed, but I could hear them all now, whispering, laughing, crying, screaming, voices I knew, voices I didn't. And beneath it all, the calm, inevitable pull. Come to us. I should have stayed away. I should have left, but I couldn't. Curiosity, fear, something worse. I stepped closer. And that's when the first hand grabbed me. The hand. God, the hand. Cold. Ice cold, like touching the underside of a glacier. But it burned too somehow, clawing into my skin, anchoring me. I screamed, but my voice wasn't my own. It carried the echoes of everyone who had vanished here, twisted and layered, reverberating through the dunes. The radio erupted, almost joyous this time, broadcasting every scream, every gasp. My throat ached, my lungs burned. I couldn't move, couldn't fight, and yet somehow I was walking, drawn forward against every instinct. The pit loomed closer. Faces pressed against the edges now, hundreds, all grinning, mouths opening in impossible ways. I tried to look away, but the voice, their voice, spoke inside my head, clearer than any whisper. You belong here. We've been waiting for you. I stumbled, fell, tried to crawl backward, but the sand shifted, swallowing my hands like quicksand. And beneath it, I could feel them. Hundreds of them. Watching, waiting, judging. I clawed at the sand. My fingernails broke. blood mixed with grit. I tasted it, coppery, metallic. And then the shadows rose. Not just shapes. Full bodies now, bending, twisting, faceless, moving in perfect, unnatural rhythm. They surrounded me. I could feel their weight, their presence pressing against me, filling my vision, filling the night. The radio screamed again, my voice now, pleading, crying, warning. And beneath that, another layer, older, louder, the voice of the desert itself. And then I saw him, or it, in the center of the pit, taller than the tallest. Dune, impossibly thin, limbs bending wrong, head cocked at an unnatural angle. It didn't have a face, only darkness, but it radiated awareness. I swear I felt it think. It reached toward me with fingers that were both solid and smoke, grasping, claiming. I knew then I couldn't escape. There was no running. There was no fight. The radio static became a chorus, layering memories, screams, confessions, betrayals. Every man who had disappeared here whispered their last thoughts, their regrets. And then it spoke. Not through the radio, not through shadows, not through my mind. Directly. Step forward. I did. I don't know why. I couldn't stop. I wanted to, but my feet carried me, dragging me over dunes that weren't dunes, over sand that moved, over shadows that reached and screamed and whispered all at once. I fell into the pit. Faces greeted me, hundreds, mouths open, teeth gnashing. I felt them press against me, pull at my arms, my legs, my chest. And the air, God, the air, it tasted of iron and rot and something sweet I couldn't place. The tall thing bent down. Darkness pooled where its face should have been. I could feel its mind, probing, folding into mine. Memories I'd hidden, secrets I hadn't spoken aloud, all laid bare. And then it whispered, voice like sand grinding against bone, "You've always been ours." I screamed, my voice, their voices. The radio carried both. The desert shuddered. The faces pressed closer, stretching, elongating, grinning wider than humanly possible. And then the ground opened beneath me, not like a hole, but like swallowing water, soft yet unyielding. I fell, and for a moment, the radio went silent. I landed in darkness, solid, suffocating darkness. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then the whispers began again. Hundreds, thousands, every soldier who had vanished, every soul consumed by this place, all speaking at once. I felt them, their hands, their eyes, their despair. And through it all, one voice louder than the rest, the voice of the thing, claiming me. Welcome home. I tried to resist. I screamed. I clawed at the air, at the walls of sand, at the darkness itself. But it was useless. Every shred of me, every thought, every memory was being folded, rewritten, consumed. And the radio still played. My own voice now, narrating my surrender, my fear, my final moments. It was a confession for anyone who might listen, anyone foolish enough to follow. And then, stillness. Absolute, suffocating, eternal stillness. I was trapped, not just trapped, but merged, a part of it now. I could feel the desert breathing around me, the whispers surrounding me, the faces staring. And the radio. The radio hummed softly, waiting, always waiting. Somewhere far off, a wind stirred. Maybe a storm. Maybe someone coming. But it wouldn't find me. Not really. Not here. I was part of the pit now. Part of the voices. Part of the waiting. And somewhere in the shifting dunes, someone else. We'll hear my name on the radio, and they'll think it's just static. It's not. They'll hear me whisper. And if they answer, they'll see. The second story begins in a place where silence feels unnatural. You ever stand in a place that feels wrong the second you breathe in? That was Fort Jericho. I was sent there in late autumn, alone. No unit, no backup. Just me, a cot, and a stack of files no one cared about anymore. They told me it was temporary duty, paperwork, and observation, while they decided whether to decommission the old post or scrap it for parts. But the truth is, no one wanted that assignment, so they gave it to me. The fort sat high on a bluff above the river, its walls crumbling but still defiant, stone blocks blackened by 100 years of storms. When I first arrived, the wind carried the smell of wet iron and pine, but beneath it was something else. A sour tang, like soil that had been turned too many times, like graves disturbed. I noticed it before I even killed the engine of the Jeep. Inside, the buildings were husks, rotting bunks, collapsed roofs, empty corridors echoing with every step. You could run your hand along the plaster and it would crumble like chalk. Still, the place was dry enough, and I was told one of the officers' quarters had been cleared out for me. That's where I set up. One desk, one cot, one lamp. Alone. The first night should have been nothing special. Just wind against the shutters, the creak of the fort settling. But I didn't sleep. Because from the moment I lay down, I heard them. Footsteps. Not mice, not wind, not the building shifting. Boots. Heavy, rhythmic, marching down the corridor outside my door. I sat up, held my breath. The lamp threw shadows across the cracked walls. The sound drew closer, steady as a metronome, then stopped. Dead still. I waited for a knock. None came. When I finally opened the door, the hallway stretched empty. Moonlight dripping through shattered windows. Dust floated in the beam of my flashlight. Nothing moved, but I swear, there was heat in the air, like bodies had just passed through. I told myself it was my nerves, exhaustion, the echo of my own imagination. But you can only lie to yourself so many times before the truth digs in. The next day, I explored more of the fort. My orders were to observe, so that's what I did. I walked the barracks, the old mess hall, the stone courtyard. Every corner smelled of mildew and rust. And still beneath it, that sour note. I found something too. In the yard behind the barracks, the ground was uneven. Patches of dirt raised like scars. Fresh earth, darker than the soil around it. The files said nothing about burials, but I counted at least 7 mounds. No markers, no dates. Just earth too new for a place this old. That night, the footsteps returned. Only this time, they didn't stop at the hallway. They marched right past my door. I pressed myself against the wall, lamp turned off, hardly breathing. I could hear leather squeaking, metal jingling, The dull strike of heels on stone. More than one set this time. A whole line, moving as though in formation. And when they reached the end of the corridor, they didn't turn. They kept going, straight through the sealed wall. The silence after was worse than the sound itself. I didn't sleep. I just sat at my desk, lamp lit, staring at the door. I thought about calling it in, but what would I say? That I was hearing soldiers who weren't there? That I was spooked by shadows in a ruin? By dawn, I convinced myself again it was nothing, just dreams clinging too tightly. But then I noticed something. My boots, the ones I'd left by the cot, were no longer by the cot. They were lined neatly by the door. Mud caked the soles, dark, wet mud. Mud I hadn't walked through. And when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't just mud. The smell hit first. Copper, sharp, unmistakable. It was blood. I don't know what you do in that moment, sitting there with boots you didn't move and mud you didn't step in. But me, I froze. Because I knew if I looked any closer, if I touched them, if I admitted what I already felt, I wouldn't come back from it. So I left them where they were. I kept my distance, and I prayed that when night came again, the sound of marching would stop. But of course, it didn't. It only got louder. The third night at Fort Jericho was the one that broke my nerves. By then, I'd learned not to try sleeping until exhaustion forced me to. I sat at my desk with a lantern burning low. The files spread in front of me. Most of it was useless. Supply lists from decades ago, rosters with names half faded, reports about drills that meant nothing now. But one sheet caught my eye. It was a casualty list. No battles, no war, not that year, anyway. But 17 names, all marked non-combat fatality. The dates matched the late autumn months. The notes were vague, found in barracks, unexplained, under review. And then the files just stopped. No follow-up, no explanations. As if someone had slammed the drawer shut and walked away forever. The marching began again while I was still reading. This time, I tried to test it. I turned off the lantern, sat in the dark, and waited. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs. The sound started faint down the far hall, then grew sharper, closer. Boots striking stone over and over. I whispered to myself, "It's in your head, just in your head." But it wasn't. The sound reached my door, and this time it hesitated. The steps stopped directly outside my room. The boards creaked like weight shifting. Then, slowly, the handle of the door twitched, not rattled, turned. I launched forward, bracing my hand against it, holding it in place with every ounce of strength. For 5 long seconds, something pulled back. Not with violence, not with fury, but with steady, unrelenting pressure, testing me. Then it let go. The silence roared in my ears. When I finally gathered the nerve to pull the door open, there was nothing in the hall, just moonlight spilling over dust. But the air reeked of sweat, old leather, and something metallic, like blood left too long on steel. I shut the door, locked it, and sat on the cot until dawn. That morning, I walked the fort again, needing daylight to convince myself I wasn't losing it. In the courtyard, I spotted something I hadn't seen before. On the far wall, half hidden under ivy, was a line of carvings, deep scratches in the stone. I brushed the vines aside. It wasn't random. It was tally marks, hundreds of them, gouged deep by something sharp. Rows and rows, like someone had been keeping count. But count of what? I didn't want the answer. By evening, I was already dreading nightfall. I thought about moving my cot into the courtyard, but the cold would have killed me faster than ghosts. So I stayed in my room, lantern lit, rifle within reach. The footsteps returned. This time, there was no hesitation. They came in formation, at least a dozen pairs, marching in unison. The sound rolled through the halls, into the courtyard, circling the entire fort like a drill. Boots on stone, leather creaking, metal clinking. I pressed my back against the wall, rifle clutched to my chest, and whispered, "It's not real. It's not real." But then I heard something new. A voice, low, commanding, distant, but sharp enough to cut through the air. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a cadence, orders being barked, and the soldiers obeyed. The march quickened, pivoted, turned on some unseen signal. The ground shook faintly with their rhythm. I couldn't breathe. My body screamed to run, but where would I go? The river cliffs on one side, the endless forest on the other. And what if they followed? So I stayed, frozen, listening. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. My ears rang with it. I thought it was over until I heard breathing. Not mine, not human, at least not anymore. A ragged exhale, just inches from my ear. I spun, rifle raised, but the room was empty. My lantern flickered. Shadows twisted across the walls. And then the boots started again, but inside my room. One step, then another. Invisible, but undeniable. The boards groaned under weight. I backed into the corner, rifle shaking in my hands, and hissed, "Stay the hell away from me!" The footsteps came closer. The air grew colder. My breath plumed white in the lantern light. And then, nothing. They stopped right in front of me, inches away. I stood there, heart hammering, staring into emptiness. Finally, the lantern blew out. Darkness swallowed everything. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed, waiting for the touch that never came. But when the first gray light of dawn crept through the window, I was still alive. Shaking, but alive. That morning, I found something else. In the dirt outside my door, clear as day, were boot prints. Dozens of them. Leading away from my quarters in two perfect columns, marching toward the courtyard. And when I followed them, I saw that the uneven mounds of dirt behind the barracks weren't 7. There were 17, exactly the number from the casualty list. That's when I stopped trying to explain it away. Something was still here, still drilling, still obeying orders that should have died a century ago. And I was standing in the middle of their fort. By the 4th night, I wasn't pretending anymore. The fort wasn't abandoned. Not really. I tried staying busy during the day, walking the walls, reading the useless files, keeping the radio close in case I lost my nerve enough to call it in. But the sun only bought me a few hours of peace. As soon as it dipped, the shadows stretched long, and I could feel the fort waking. That evening, I sat on the steps of the courtyard, smoking a cigarette I swore I'd quit months ago. The wind whistled through broken windows, carrying that sour smell I'd noticed on day 1. Damp soil and something coppery. My boots rested on the stone where centuries of soldiers had marched before me. And I caught myself thinking, maybe they never stopped. I don't know why I stayed there so long. Maybe part of me wanted proof. Maybe part of me wanted to be wrong. But when the last light drained from the sky, I heard it again. The march. Faint at first, from deep inside the fort. Then rolling outward in a perfect, practiced cadence. I froze. The cigarette trembled in my fingers. The steps grew louder, closer, echoing across the courtyard. And then they emerged. I swear to you, I saw them. Not clearly, not like flesh and blood, but as shapes. Rows of men in uniform, their outlines made of shadow, thicker than the night itself. Helmets, rifles slung, boots pounding in rhythm. Their faces were nothing but hollows. They marched across the courtyard without looking at me, past me, straight toward the far wall, where no door or gate had stood for decades. And as they reached it, they didn't stop. They vanished into the stone, like smoke through glass. My cigarette burned down to the filter between my fingers. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe, because just before they disappeared, one of them turned his head. The hollow face fixed on me, and even without eyes, I felt him see me. I spent the rest of the night in my room, rifle pointed at the door, lantern blazing. Every sound made me flinch. The wind, the creak of wood, the scratch of mice. But worse than all of it was the silence that came after their march ended. It wasn't peace, it was waiting. The next day, I tried to leave. I packed what little I had, slung my bag over my shoulder, and started the Jeep. But the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. No matter how many times I tried, it wouldn't turn over. Fuel was fine. Battery was fine. I checked everything I knew how. It didn't matter. The fort wasn't letting me go. So I walked. I headed down the overgrown road through the trees, telling myself I'd follow it until I hit the nearest town. But after 2 hours, I came back into the clearing, staring straight at Fort Jericho. I'd walked in a circle. The tracks in the dirt proved it. My own boots leading right back where I started. That's when I understood. I wasn't just stationed here. I was trapped here. That night, the voices returned. Not just the commanding officer this time. More of them. Faint whispers, rising and falling, like soldiers murmuring in ranks. I pressed my ear against the wall, and the sound seeped through the stone, crawling into me. I heard words I shouldn't have. Hold the line. No retreat. Dig in. Orders meant for men long dead. And then, beneath it all, one voice cut through, low and guttural. He's ours. I staggered back from the wall, bile rising in my throat. My lantern flickered violently, shadows tearing across the room. My rifle felt useless in my hands, a child's toy against something I couldn't even touch. The whispers grew louder, filling every corner, every crack. I shouted, begged them to stop. My own voice bounced back at me, swallowed in the chaos. And then, silence. I thought it was over. But when I turned, the door was open. I hadn't touched it. The air in the hall shimmered, thick as heat haze. The boot prints on the floor appeared fresh, pressed into the dust in perfect formation. I should have slammed the door, locked it, prayed for morning. But something pulled me forward. Not physically, no hand on my shoulder, no push, but a pull all the same, dragging me step by step into the corridor. The air grew colder as I walked. My breath fogged in front of me. The formation of prints stretched ahead, down the hall, toward the courtyard. And when I reached it, I heard drums. Faint at first, then louder. A steady, deep thrum, like a heartbeat outside my chest. In the center of the courtyard, the shadows gathered again. Dozens of them. This time, clearer. Helmets glinting with impossible light. Bayonets fixed. Uniforms hanging in tatters. Their hollow faces turned in unison. They saw me. And the drums stopped. The silence pressed down like a weight. Then the commanding voice barked one word. Sharp, vicious, unmistakable. Charge! The shadows surged forward. Rifles lowered. Boots pounding like thunder. Straight at me. I fired blindly, shots cracking through the night. The muzzle flash lit the courtyard in harsh bursts. Bullets passed through them like smoke. They didn't slow. I ran. Through the halls, up crumbling stairs, my boots slipping on stone. The thunder of their charge filled every passage, echoing closer, closer. My lungs burned. My vision swam. But I kept running, desperate for any place to hide. At the top of the barracks, I slammed a door shut behind me and threw my weight against it. The pounding of boots reached the stairs, then the landing. I braced for the impact, but it never came. The sound stopped. On the other side of the door, silence. I waited, every muscle trembling. Sweat freezing on my skin. Seconds crawled into minutes. Nothing. And then, softly, from right behind me, inside the room, fall in. That voice, deep, commanding, close enough to feel it vibrate in my chest, froze me solid. Fall in. I didn't turn. I couldn't. My whole body locked up, every nerve screaming that if I looked, I wouldn't come back. The room was ice cold. My breath puffed white in the dark. The door was still in front of me, bolted shut, and yet the voice hadn't come from beyond it. It had come from behind me, from the shadows that pooled like tar in the corners. Fall in. Louder now, demanding. A shuffle of boots answered it. Not mine. The scrape of rifles shifting in hands that weren't there. The faint, dry rattle of canteens at ghostly belts. I closed my eyes, whispering through clenched teeth, "No, no, you're not real. You're not." The floor shook. A single stomp, so heavy the boards splintered beneath me. I staggered forward, hands clutching the doorframe. Then came the drums. Not faint anymore, deafening, pounding like thunder in the marrow of my bones. My ribs rattled with every strike. I pressed my palms to my ears, but it did nothing. The sound was inside me. And layered over it, voices, dozens, maybe hundreds, calling cadence, chanting, screaming. I threw the door open and bolted. The halls warped around me. What had been ruined by daylight was whole again. Walls lined with flags, gas lamps flickering, boots slamming in rhythm as soldiers poured past me in perfect columns. Their faces were shadows, eyeless voids, yet they moved with mechanical precision, rifles gleaming as though freshly oiled. None of them touched me. They streamed past, through, around, but never collided. And still, every brush of their presence left a chill so deep my teeth ached. I stumbled into the courtyard, gasping, and froze. It was filled, packed shoulder to shoulder with ranks of them. Black silhouettes, helmets tilted toward me, waiting. At the far end stood the officer, taller than the rest, uniform sharper, boots polished to a mirror sheen. But where his face should have been, there was nothing. A pit. A hollow so dark it bent the air around it. He raised a hand. The ranks snapped to attention. Another hand raised toward me. And then he spoke, voice booming through the night, rattling the stone walls. "You are conscripted." The ranks echoed it. 1,000 voices layering into one. Conscripted! My chest seized. My heart slammed against my ribs. I screamed, "I'm not one of you! I'm not!" But the officer stepped forward, and the ranks followed. A tide of shadows rolling toward me, rifles leveled, bayonets glinting in the moonlight. I ran, out through the courtyard, through a gap in the wall, into the trees. Branches whipped my face, roots clawed my boots, but I didn't stop. The drums followed, the chants, the endless thunder of marching boots. No matter how far I ran, the sound stayed at my back, and then silence. I collapsed against a tree, chest heaving, sweat freezing on my skin. My ears rang with the absence of noise. Had I escaped? I looked up. The trees were gone. Stone walls loomed on all sides. I was standing in the courtyard again. The officer waited, ranks arrayed behind him. There was no escape. My knees gave out. The rifle slipped from my hands, clattering on the stone. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The officer raised his hand again, and they surged forward. Shadows swallowed me. Cold seared through my skin, into my veins, burning like frostbite. Hands I couldn't see gripped my arms, my shoulders, my throat. 1,000 voices screamed in my skull, drowning out my own. And then, darkness. I woke on the cot. Morning light spilled through the cracked window. The files still lay on the desk. The lantern sat cold. For a moment, I thought it had been a nightmare, until I noticed the mud caked across the floor, trailing in perfect formation, straight from the courtyard to my door. And my uniform, my clean uniform, was gone. In its place, folded neatly on the chair, was another, faded, tattered, buttons tarnished, the kind they wore a century ago. I didn't touch it, didn't move it, but all day I felt eyes on me. The fort was quiet, but it wasn't empty. That night, the boots began again, the drums, the chants, and when I looked at my reflection in the cracked mirror, for just a moment, I didn't see my own face. I saw a hollow. I don't know how many nights have passed since then. Days blur together. The radio crackles sometimes, but never with voices I recognize. My Jeep is still dead. The road still leads nowhere, but the marching never stops. Sometimes I catch myself falling into step, my boots hitting stone in rhythm with theirs, my breath matching the chant, my fingers brushing the stock of a rifle I don't remember picking up. And sometimes I hear the officer's voice inside me, not outside, inside. He doesn't order me anymore. He instructs, he drills, he trains, and I obey. Because here's the truth. The fort isn't abandoned. It never was. Soldiers may die, but orders don't. And once you've heard the drums, once you've felt the march in your bones, you don't get to leave. You join. I was stationed at an abandoned fort. At least, that's what they told me. But Fort Jericho still has an army. And now, I'm part of it. If you ever hear boots behind you in the dark, don't turn, don't listen, don't fall in step. Because once you do, you'll never march alone again. The third story drags us deeper into the shadows. The desert doesn't forgive. It doesn't forget either. I learned that out there, in the middle of nothing but heat and silence, where even your own shadow feels like it wants to slip away. I was stationed in a forward operating base, small, temporary, not much more than steel walls and canvas roofs, somewhere in the endless dust between Iraq and nowhere. I can still smell the air, burned metal, hot oil, sand baked so long it carried the memory of every dead thing it ever covered. You breathe it in until it coats your tongue, and then it doesn't leave. We thought we were the ones watching the land. Patrols, perimeter checks, convoys in and out. But the land was watching us. I didn't notice at first. Nobody did. The first sign was so small, so easy to dismiss, that I almost didn't remember it until much later. But it was the kind of thing that lodges in your head, like grit under your eyelid. It was night, my second week there. The desert drops from boiling to freezing when the sun goes down, and the silence becomes unbearable. You think silence is nothing, but no. Silence is a presence. It presses in. It crawls over you. I was standing guard at the eastern wall. Just me, my rifle, and the sky split wide open with stars. Then I saw something move. Not out in the distance. Not across the dunes. No, right there inside the base. I swear to you, I saw sand shifting, like a snake coiling just beneath the surface. It slid across the ground, making no sound. I gripped my rifle, heart racing, trying to make sense of it. And then it was gone. Just gone. I told myself it was a trick of the wind. You'll tell yourself the same if you ever see it. But the wind doesn't move like that. The next day, one of the guys went missing. Carter. A joker, always humming, always smiling too wide for a place that eats smiles whole. He'd gone out to piss behind one of the Humvees during the night. Never came back. We searched the whole damn compound. Nothing. Not a footprint. Not a shred of fabric. The desert had just swallowed him. Command wrote it up as desertion. Said maybe he wandered off. Maybe he snapped. But listen, I knew Carter. He wasn't the type to just vanish. And even if he did, there would have been tracks. In sand, there are always tracks. Always. Except there weren't. That was the first contradiction. You see why I'm telling you this now? You understand why I can't sleep when the wind kicks up and rattles the window panes? Why I wake up sweating, convinced there's sand spilling through the cracks in my floorboards. I thought it was just Carter. One bad night. One mistake. But then the others started noticing things too. Voices on the wind that didn't belong to anyone living. Figures on the horizon that never came closer. The ground shifting underfoot like something alive was breathing just below the surface. I didn't want to believe it. God help me. I tried not to. But the desert doesn't care what you believe. And the next time I was on guard duty, I heard it. A whisper. Not the wind, not imagination. A whisper, clear as your voice right now, crawling out from the sand at my boots. It said my name. I heard my name, like someone was reading my mail. Slow, deliberate, soft enough that I could have convinced myself it was the radio or a passing convoy. But the air was dead, and the radio in my vest was a dead weight. I remember the exact taste in my mouth then. Metal and dust and the memory of Carter's laugh. You notice small things when fear starts to vote on your senses. You notice the wrongness of a sound. I knelt and ran my hand along the ground. The sand was cool against my palm, crusted as if something beneath it had exhaled all night. There were no prints, no disturbance, just a place where the sand had settled differently, like a page folded and smoothed again. I scraped at it with my fingernail, and the grains fell away like ash. Why did that feel like digging up a secret? Why did my skin go numb? We started keeping lists. Names, times, who was missing from mess, who slept through watch. Lists are a comfort when the world refuses to be reasonable. We pinned them to the wall like talismans, like maybe ink could argue with the desert and win. It didn't. The lists grew. So did the quiet. Someone painted a memorial on an oil drum the second week. Carter's name in crooked letters, flowers that looked like they'd been drawn by someone who forgot what flowers looked like. We all touched that drum at least once, because touch is the only argument left against forgetting. Touch and smoke-stained coffee. Touch and the small joke somebody cracked in the mess that never landed right again. There were flashes of normalcy. A letter from home tucked into a jacket. A lullaby hummed badly by a corporal who'd been a dad. Before this, for a second, everything held together on those thin threads, and I tasted salt, tears, or sweat. I wasn't sure. Then something would happen to snap it all back into the wrong shape. The whispers started more often. Not just my name. Names in fragments. Snatches of things you don't want to hear. Childhood addresses. The color of a girl's dress at prom. The squeak of a bicycle chain you thought you'd forgotten. One night it called my brother, the one I hadn't spoken to in 3 years. I stood at the perimeter and listened to the sand invent him, calling him over and over until my knees gave out. If you were there, would you have run toward the voice or away from it? I didn't know what brave meant anymore. And the sand, God, the sand, it moved like someone rearranging furniture in the dark. Small ridges formed in the middle of the base, arcs and spirals that meant nothing and everything. We found a circle of stones one evening, placed neatly like a game we hadn't learned. It took 3 of us to move one of those stones. It was heavier than it should have been. The metal of my glove left a smear. And for a moment, I wondered if the stone had a face. Maybe you think I'm getting hysterical. Maybe you think fear makes stories larger than they are. But there were facts. Physical facts. Tracks that started and stopped. Boots that sank into the sand and then found themselves clean, as if they'd never touched earth. The Humvee tires showed prints as if someone had driven upside down. The dogs, there were 2, stared into the dunes and would not be coaxed away. They refused treats. They refused to look at us. Their coats bristled, and one morning we woke to find every hair on the dogs' backs matted with sand on the inside, as if something had brushed past them from below. We set cameras. We laughed. We called it science, like men who believed in the power of evidence more than the power of superstition. The cameras caught a lot of static and a lot of smears that resolved into nothing. And then, on the 3rd night, one camera caught a shadow that was wrong. Not the shadow of a man, not of a vehicle. Something that slid along the ground like oil spilled across asphalt. It moved with a rhythm that made our teeth ache when we watched it on playback. The shadow curved around the barracks, leaned close to the sleeping forms in their cots, and lingered like a question. We were given orders to act like we didn't see it. Commanders like to preserve the illusion of control. They file reports that sound like physics and logistics and forget to mention the smell of fear. When you write a report, your handwriting is steady. When you whisper in the dark, the letters collapse. I wrote a report anyway. The ink blurred halfway across the page as if the paper itself had been weeping. Men started hearing things under their boots, a scraping like someone combing the earth. The mech, my platoon sergeant, told us to laugh it off, to make jokes, to keep cadence in our steps. He'd been a joke teller before he stopped. One night, he woke up screaming and clawing at his chest as if something was down there trying to get out. He swore he felt fingers under his ribs. The medics sedated him and called it a panic attack. You can sedate a man. You cannot sedate what's clawing at the seams of what we used to call truth. There were notes, folded bits of paper placed at the edge of tents, written in a hand none of us recognized, but somehow intimate. Tiny confessions of memory, lines like, "You left the light on at 12. Don't forget the soup burned." That one sank in because one of the men on our watch had indeed cooked soup at midnight and set it aside. How did a paper know? Who was writing these? We found no footprints leading to the tents. We found no matches burned. The only witness was the wind that swore it hadn't been near. I kept thinking I could rationalize any of this away. Heat stroke, isolation, practical jokes. War does exquisite work at bending reality. But one thing kept nagging, the way things stopped making sense all at once. How a fabric of small, sensible threads could suddenly unravel into something that left edges so raw you could feel them. There was a pattern forming under the chaos, and every hint of that pattern felt like a trap with a dangling question. Why us? Why here? And then the perimeter alarm went off at 2 in the morning. It was not the thin, shrill alert we expected. This was a sound that seemed to come from the ground itself, a low, hollow bellow that rolled through the base and made the lamps flicker. We grabbed rifles and helmets and everything that made a man feel like he still had a job to do, and we ran toward the sound. The sand at the eastern wall was moving in a long, deliberate line, slow as tide, quick as something hunting. There were shapes in the movement. Eyes? I don't know. But there were definitely shapes. My boots sank halfway in, and then the sand closed over them like a mouth. I reached out. My hand met grit, warm and damp and carrying the scent of old rotten things. I felt something brush my fingers from below, something that was wet and then cold and then gone. Then I heard my name again. This time it wasn't a whisper, it was a chorus. The sand held me like it wanted me. Every instinct screamed to pull free, but when I yanked my boots, it sucked tighter, like I was knee-deep in wet cement. My squad shouted, flashlights cutting across my face, rifles clattering as they chambered rounds. I could hear the terror in their voices. It's one thing to face a man, another to face the ground you're standing on. "Don't move," one of them yelled, as if that was advice worth giving. And then something let go. Not like I pulled free. No, it let me go. The sand relaxed, almost playful, and I stumbled backward onto my hands. I swear to you, I felt laughter in the ground. Not sound, feeling. A vibration in my bones that had no business being there. We poured light over the dunes. The movement had stopped. Just an ordinary desert night again. Stars stabbing at us from a sky too big for comfort. But in the silence, we all knew what had happened. None of us spoke. The alarm still buzzed faintly, a nervous insect trapped in metal, until someone cut the power. The next day, we found Martinez, or what was left of him. He hadn't gone missing. We'd seen him in the chow line the night before. But in the morning, he was lying out past the perimeter wire, face down, skin baked by the sun. No blood, no wounds, just hollow. His body was collapsed like someone had scooped the insides out with a ladle. His dog tags clinked against bone when we rolled him over. His eyes were wide open, mouth stretched in a scream he'd never finished. You want to know the worst part? His boots were spotless. No sand clung to them. No tracks led to where he lay. It was as if he'd been set down from above. We buried him fast, because what else can you do? But the sand didn't take. The grave kindly. By evening, the mound we'd shoveled was flat again, like it had swallowed not just the man, but the memory of him. The cross we stuck there leaned, sank, and then disappeared overnight. We didn't try again. Sleep stopped being safe after that. I'd close my eyes and wake choking on grit, sand crusting my gums, lining my throat. I'd hack it out into my hand, wet, dark grains that smelled of rust. Some mornings, I'd find the same sand on my cot, piled in small, neat circles like offerings. The others had it too, though none of us admitted it until much later. And the voices, they grew bolder. No more whispers at the edge of hearing. Now they climbed right inside. At first, they said my name. Then they spoke in voices I recognized. My father's, long dead. My ex's, saying things she'd never said. My own, echoing back at me with words I hadn't spoken yet. The medic, Harrow, cracked first. He started covering his ears during patrol, mumbling prayers, saying the ground was teaching him things. He drew symbols on his arms with pen ink, tight spirals and jagged lines, repeating them over and over. So it knows I listen, he said. One night he didn't come back. We found his boots by the wire, still laced, empty as shells. We were soldiers, trained for order. But order bleeds out quick when the earth beneath you isn't stable. Radios spat nothing but static laced with fate crying. Fuel drums bled dark stains that smelled sweet and rotten, though none were punctured. Our maps shifted, literally shifted, the ink smearing, red lines curling like they were alive. I tried to write home. My pen wouldn't work. I borrowed another. The words dissolved on the page, even as I wrote them, letters breaking apart, into shapes that weren't letters at all. When I touched the paper, the ink came away like soot. I can't explain the fear that settles in your chest when even language refuses to behave. Then came the night. The sand rose higher than the wall. It was after midnight. The base generator had sputtered out, leaving us in a blackout. We lit chem sticks, pale green ghosts bobbing in the dark, and that's when we heard it. Movement, steady, deliberate, like 1,000 bare feet dragging through grit. We turned toward the dunes, and I swear on my life, the desert was standing up. The wall, 12 feet of corrugated steel, trembled as a ridge of sand pressed against it from the outside. It wasn't a dune. It wasn't wind. It was climbing. The whole wall groaned, metal screeching, and every man pointed his weapon, though no one dared fire. What do you shoot at when the horizon itself is moving? And then a face formed. Not human, not animal. A shape in the sand, vast and shifting, eyes hollow as sinkholes. It leaned over us, grain by grain, until I felt its breath. Hot, dry, filled with whispers that burned the inside of my skull. I dropped my rifle. My hands wouldn't obey me. It spoke, not out loud, not in English, not in anything I could translate. It filled me with one thought that wasn't mine. You belong here. When I blinked, it was gone. Just night again. Just stars. The wall stood intact, silent, as if nothing had touched it. But from that moment on, I knew. We weren't holding ground in that desert. The desert was holding us. And the next morning, another man was missing. This time, it was the sergeant himself. The sergeant was gone when dawn broke. His cot still warm. Boots still lined neatly at the foot like he'd meant to slip them on again. No signs of a struggle. No tracks. Just absence. That was the part that broke us. The clean emptiness. Chain of command evaporated with him. The lieutenant tried to hold us together, but his voice shook. He ordered more patrols, tighter watches, stricter checks, as if discipline could sketch over holes in reality. But the desert isn't impressed by orders. By then, none of us were sleeping. When we did, dreams were the same. Buried alive, lungs filling with sand, arms clawing upward toward a sky that grew smaller and smaller until it was just a pinhole. I woke gasping one night, sand actually in my throat. I stumbled outside to spit it out, and in the pale moonlight, I saw something. Every dune around the base was trembling, just a little, like breathing. That's when it sank in. We weren't on solid ground at all. The desert wasn't land, it was body. Men started turning on each other. Small fights over rations, over cigarettes, over who'd left the gate unlatched. I heard one man accuse another of being with them, with it. They fought until their fists were slick, until one of them didn't get up. We didn't even bury him. No one dared touch the ground anymore. We left his body there, watching as the sand slowly pulled it under. The lieutenant cracked next. I found him at the wall, mumbling to it, cheek pressed against the steel. "It's teaching me," he whispered when I dragged him away. His eyes were full of grit, so packed in it looked like tears. That night, he walked barefoot into the dunes. Nobody followed. The moonlight showed him only for a moment before he was gone, as though the desert swallowed him in one breath. I was alone after that, or maybe I wasn't. I couldn't tell anymore. Every corner of the base whispered with familiar voices, men who were gone, men who'd never been there. The chow tent reeked of meat, though the freezers were empty. My cot pressed up against me, like someone breathing under the mattress. The radios spoke in overlapping tongues, not static anymore, but languages layered like sediment. The sand was always moving now, even in daylight. Small waves running across the compound, curling around my boots like animals scenting me. And beneath it all, a rhythm. Not random, not weather. Heartbeat. Slow. Enormous. Patient. I tried leaving once. Took a Humvee, loaded it with water and fuel, drove straight out into the horizon. The compass spun uselessly, The dunes shifted, circling me, always circling. After hours of driving, the base was in front of me again. I hadn't left at all. That was when I understood. The desert wasn't surrounding us. It was inside us. I gave up patrols. I gave up reports. I sat by the wall at night, listening. And it spoke. God help me, it spoke. It told me things I shouldn't know. Things about the earth, about the bones buried deeper than any war dead, about what lived here before words existed. It told me there was no such thing as silence, that even the stillest moment is full of voices if you're willing to let them in. I don't remember the last day clearly. The sun never rose, though my watch said it should have. The stars flickered out, one by one, like someone pinching candles. The sand climbed higher and higher, spilling into the base until I was knee-deep, chest-deep, drowning. I opened my mouth to scream, and the desert poured in, filling me until I couldn't tell where I ended and it began. And then calm. I'm not sure how I made it back. I shouldn't have. Maybe it let me go, the way it did that first night. Maybe it wanted someone left to talk about it. But I know this. I still taste grit every morning. I still hear my name whispered in the plumbing, in the hum of the refrigerator, in the hiss of tires on wet asphalt. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I feel the weight of the dunes pressing down, patient as breath. The desert doesn't forgive. The desert doesn't forget. And neither do the things it keeps.